In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death whispers through every rocky crevice and enemy fire echoes like thunder, one woman's story would shatter everything the military thought they knew about courage under fire. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been labeled just another support personnel, someone to stay back, handle communications, and keep out of the real fighting. The brass saw her as expendable backup, a checkbox on their diversity roster. Her own squad mates barely acknowledged her presence during briefings, treating her like equipment that happened to wear the same uniform. But on October 15, 2019, high on a desolate ridge overlooking the Karingal Valley, when Taliban fighters had her entire squad pinned down and picked off one by one, when their ammunition ran low and hope ran lower, when seasoned combat veterans were calling out final messages to their families, it would be Maria's single, impossible shot that would turn a massacre into a miracle. This is the story of how a woman they dismissed as just support became the reason 8 soldiers made it home alive. A story the Pentagon tried to bury. A story that proves heroism doesn't wear the face we expect, and courage doesn't come from the people we think it should. Sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one who saves everyone else. Maria Santos never wanted to prove anything to anyone. She just wanted to serve her country, do her job well, and maybe save enough money to help her mother back in El Paso keep the family restaurant running. At 26, she had already spent 4 years in the Army, working her way up through the communications division with quiet determination and flawless performance reviews that somehow never seemed to matter when promotion time came around. The forward operating base Chapman in eastern Afghanistan was like a small, heavily fortified city dropped into the middle of nowhere. Surrounded by towering mountains that seemed to touch the clouds, it housed nearly 3,000 American and coalition forces. The base buzzed with constant activity, helicopters landing and taking off, supply convoys rolling in and out, soldiers conducting training exercises in the dusty courtyards between the concrete barriers and razor wire. Maria had been stationed there for 8 months, long enough to know every face in the mess hall and every sound that meant danger was coming. She worked 12-hour shifts in the communications center, a windowless bunker filled with radio equipment, satellite phones, and computer screens that connected Chapman to the outside world. Her job was to coordinate between different units, relay intelligence reports, and make sure everyone stayed in contact during operations. It was important work, but nobody treated it that way. The infantry soldiers who came through the comm center barely looked at her. They would drop off their radio requests, grunt a few words about frequencies and call signs, then leave without so much as a thank you. To them, she was invisible, just another piece of equipment that happened to wear sergeant stripes. The worst part was her own squad. Bravo Company, 2nd Platoon was supposed to be her unit, her military family. But from the day she arrived, they made it clear she was not really one of them. There was Sergeant First Class Mike Rodriguez, the squad leader who had been in Afghanistan for 3 tours and treated the war like his personal hunting ground. He was the kind of soldier who could field strip a rifle blindfolded and navigate through mountain terrain in complete darkness, but who also believed women belonged anywhere except in combat zones. Then there was Corporal Danny Walsh from Boston, whose loud mouth and constant jokes masked the fact that he was scared every single day. He covered his fear by picking on anyone he thought was weaker, and, in his mind, that definitely included Maria. Private First Class Jake Morrison was the youngest at 19, eager to prove himself and desperate for approval from the older soldiers. He followed whatever lead Rodriguez and Walsh set, even when he seemed uncomfortable doing it. Staff Sergeant Kevin Brown was different. He was quiet, professional, and never said anything directly disrespectful to Maria. But his silence was almost worse than the others' open dismissal. When she tried to contribute to tactical discussions, he would simply ignore her input and move on. When she volunteered for patrol duties, he would assign her to radio watch instead. He treated her like a child who needed protection rather than a trained soldier who wanted to do her job. The 2 other members of the squad were Specialist Tony Gutierrez, a medic who kept to himself and seemed to judge everyone equally, and Private Marcus Thompson, who was so new to the country he still jumped at every unexpected sound. Neither of them were openly hostile to Maria, but they were not exactly supportive either. They followed the lead of the senior soldiers and kept their distance. Maria tried to prove herself in small ways. She volunteered for extra duties, studied tactical manuals in her free time, and practiced her marksmanship whenever possible. She scored higher than half the squad on the rifle range, but Rodriguez dismissed it by saying shooting at paper targets was nothing like combat. When she completed an advanced communications course with honors, Walsh joked that at least she was good at something useful, like taking messages. The breaking point came during a routine patrol preparation in early October. The squad was getting ready to escort a supply convoy through a dangerous stretch of mountain road when Rodriguez announced the assignments. Maria was told to stay back and monitor radio traffic from the base. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have been training for months to go on patrol. My performance reviews are excellent, and I know this mission backwards and forwards." Rodriguez did not even look up from the map he was studying. "Santos, your job is communications. Leave the fighting to the fighters." "But I am a fighter," Maria insisted. "I am a soldier, just like everyone else here." This time Rodriguez did look up, and his expression was not friendly. "Listen, Santos, I know you want to play soldier, but this is not a game. When bullets start flying, I need people I can count on to watch my back. I need people who can handle themselves in a firefight without me having to worry about protecting them. How can you know what I can handle if you never give me a chance to show you?" Walsh laughed from across the room. "Come on, Santos. You really think you are ready to go toe-to-toe with the Taliban? These guys have been fighting in these mountains since before you were born." "I have been trained for combat, just like all of you," Maria replied, her cheeks burning with frustration. "I qualified expert with my rifle. I passed all the same physical fitness tests. I know the tactical procedures." "Knowing procedures and surviving combat are two different things," Rodriguez said firmly. "My job is to bring my soldiers home alive. All of them. That means putting people in positions where they can succeed, not setting them up to fail. You are setting me up to fail by not letting me do my job. Your job is communications and support. That is what you signed up for, and that is what you are good at." Brown, who had been silent during the exchange, finally spoke up. "Rodriguez is right, Santos. This particular mission has a high risk factor. Maybe it would be better if you stayed back this time." The dismissal in his voice hurt worse than Rodriguez's open hostility. At least Rodriguez was honest about his prejudices. Brown pretended to be protecting her while making it clear he did not believe she belonged with them either. Maria felt the familiar burn of tears behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of them. Instead, she nodded stiffly and returned to her equipment checks without another word. The squad finished their preparations and left for the mission while she remained behind, monitoring their radio chatter and feeling like a failure. That night, she called her mother on one of the satellite phones during a quiet period in the comm center. Rosa Santos had worked double shifts at the restaurant for 20 years to support her family after Maria's father died in a construction accident. She was the strongest person Maria knew, and hearing her voice always helped put things in perspective. "Mija, you sound sad," her mother said immediately. "What is wrong?" "Nothing, Mama. Just tired." "Do not lie to your mother. I raised you for 26 years. I know when something is bothering you." Maria found herself telling her mother everything. The constant dismissal from her squad, the frustration of being kept away from real missions, the feeling that she was wasting her time and talents in a job that anyone could do. "You know what your father used to say?" Rosa asked when Maria finished venting. "He used to say that sometimes the most important work is the work nobody sees. The foundation that holds up the building, the ingredients that make the meal taste good. People notice when those things are missing, even if they do not appreciate them when they are there." "But, Mama, I want to make a difference. I want to serve my country, not just sit in a bunker talking on the radio." "You are making a difference, Mija. Maybe not in the way you imagined, but you are keeping those soldiers connected to each other and to home. That matters." "It does not feel like it matters." Rosa was quiet for a moment. "Your father was a proud man. Sometimes too proud. He thought he had to prove himself to every construction crew he worked with. He took dangerous jobs, worked longer hours than he should have, all to show that he belonged. You know what happened to him?" Maria did know. Her father had fallen from a high-rise building because he volunteered for a job that more experienced workers had turned down. He wanted to prove he was just as capable as anyone else, and it cost him his life. I am not saying do not pursue your dreams, Rosa continued. I am saying be smart about it. Be patient. Your time will come. After the call, Maria sat in the empty communications center and thought about her mother's words. Maybe Rosa was right. Maybe she was trying too hard to force something that would happen naturally if she just kept doing her job well and waiting for the right opportunity. But as the days passed, that opportunity seemed further away than ever. The squad continued to treat her like an outsider. Other communications personnel around the base started referring to her as Rodriguez's babysitter because she spent so much time monitoring his squad's radio traffic. Even the officers who relied on her work seemed to view her as interchangeable with any other communications specialist. The only person who treated her with any real respect was Captain Jennifer Hayes, the intelligence officer who worked closely with the communications center. Hayes was one of the few female officers at Chapman, and she had fought her own battles to be taken seriously in a male-dominated environment. Santos, Hayes said one afternoon as she picked up some intelligence reports, I heard Rodriguez gave you a hard time about patrol duty again. It is fine, ma'am. He knows his squad better than I do. Hayes raised an eyebrow. That is a very diplomatic way of saying he is being an ass. Despite herself, Maria smiled. I would not use those words, ma'am. Well, I would. Look, Santos, I know Rodriguez's type. He has been doing the same job the same way for 10 years, and he is not interested in changing. But that does not mean he is right about everything. What can I do about it? He is the squad leader. Keep doing what you are doing. Keep training, keep improving, keep proving that you belong. Eventually, someone will notice. Maybe not Rodriguez, but someone. How long did it take for you, ma'am? Hayes thought for a moment. Too long. But it happened. And when it did, I was ready. That conversation stuck with Maria over the next few days. She increased her training schedule, spending extra hours at the firing range and in the gym. She studied patrol routes and tactical procedures until she knew them better than some of the soldiers who had been on dozens of missions. She learned the names and backgrounds of every Taliban commander operating in their area of operations. She also started paying closer attention to her squad's radio communications during missions. Every time they went out, she listened to their chatter, noting their procedures, their communication patterns, and the way they handled different situations. She began to understand each soldier's personality and capabilities just by listening to their voices under stress. Rodriguez was methodical and careful, always following established procedures. Walsh was aggressive and impatient, often wanting to move faster than tactical wisdom suggested. Brown was steady and reliable, the kind of soldier who could be counted on to make the right decision under pressure. Morrison was eager but inexperienced, sometimes volunteering for dangerous assignments before thinking them through. Gutierrez was professional and calm, focused on his medical responsibilities. Thompson was still learning, following orders without question, but sometimes missing important details. She started to see patterns in their missions, which routes they preferred, how they responded to different types of threats, what their standard operating procedures were for various situations. Without realizing it, Maria was becoming an expert on her squad's capabilities and tactics, even though she had never been on a mission with them. 2 weeks before everything changed, Rodriguez's squad had a close call during a routine patrol. They were escorting a supply convoy through a narrow mountain pass when Taliban fighters opened fire from a ridge line above them. The squad took cover behind their vehicles while the convoy continued through the kill zone. But they were pinned down for almost an hour before air support arrived to drive off the attackers. Maria monitored the entire engagement from the communications center, relaying coordinates to the pilots and keeping higher headquarters informed of the situation. She listened to the fear in Thompson's voice when he reported that Morrison had been hit by shrapnel. She heard the determination in Gutierrez's updates as he worked to stabilize the wounded soldier. She felt the relief in Rodriguez's voice when the helicopters finally arrived and the firing stopped. Morrison's injuries were not life-threatening, but he was evacuated to a larger medical facility for surgery. That left the squad short one member just as they were assigned to one of the most dangerous missions of their deployment. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value Taliban commander was moving through their sector, traveling with a small security detail along predictable routes. Several squads were being positioned to intercept him, including Rodriguez's unit. The mission would require them to establish an observation post on a ridge overlooking a known Taliban supply route and wait for the target to appear. It was exactly the kind of mission Maria had been training for, a combination of surveillance, communications, and potential combat. But, with Morrison in the hospital, Rodriguez was reluctant to take his undermanned squad into such dangerous territory. "I need another soldier," he told Captain Hayes during the mission briefing. "Morrison was our newest guy, but he was still a rifleman. I cannot do this mission with only 5 people. Personnel are tight right now," Hayes replied. "Most of our people are already committed to this operation. I can give you Santos." Rodriguez's expression soured immediately. "Ma'am, with respect, this is not a communications mission. This is direct action. We might end up in a firefight." Santos is a qualified soldier. She has been requesting patrol duty for months. Her marksmanship scores are better than half your squad. Marksmanship scores do not mean anything if she freezes up when people start shooting at her. Hayes fixed him with a steady stare. "How do you know she will freeze up? Have you ever given her the chance to prove otherwise?" Rodriguez clearly wanted to argue, but he also knew he needed another soldier for the mission. After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but she follows orders without question, and she stays out of the way if things get complicated." "She will follow orders just like any other soldier under your command," Hayes said firmly. "And if things get complicated, you might be surprised what she is capable of." When Maria learned she would finally be going on a real mission, she felt a mixture of excitement and terror. This was what she had been waiting for, what she had trained for, but it was also more dangerous than anything she had done before. The Taliban commander they were hunting was known for his tactical expertise and his willingness to fight to the death rather than surrender. She spent the rest of the day checking and rechecking her equipment, reviewing the mission plan, and trying to calm her nerves. Her rifle was clean and properly zeroed. Her radio equipment was tested and ready. Her medical supplies were organized and accessible. Everything was as perfect as she could make it. That evening, she called her mother one more time before the mission. "I am finally getting my chance, Mama," she said, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Your chance for what, Mija?" "To show that I belong. To prove that I can do this job." Rosa was quiet for a long moment. "Promise me you will be careful. Promise me you will come home." "I promise, Mama. And promise me you will not try to do anything stupid to impress those men. You have nothing to prove to them. I just want to do my part. Your part is to do your job and stay alive. Everything else is just ego." After the call, Maria lay in her narrow cot and stared at the ceiling of her tent. Tomorrow, she would finally get the chance she had been waiting for. Tomorrow, she would find out if all her training and preparation meant anything. Tomorrow, she would discover what kind of soldier she really was. She had no idea that by the end of the next day, she would be the only reason any of them survived. The helicopter lifted off from Chapman just before sunrise, carrying Rodriguez's squad toward their destination high in the mountains. Maria pressed her face to the small window and watched the landscape below change from the relatively flat area around the base to increasingly rugged terrain carved by centuries of wind and water. The peaks rose like ancient monuments, their slopes scarred by landslides and carved with deep ravines that could hide entire armies. The flight took 45 minutes, covering ground that would have required 2 days of dangerous travel by foot or vehicle. Maria had never seen Afghanistan from this perspective before, and despite her nervousness about the mission, she found herself amazed by the raw beauty of the country. The morning light painted the mountainsides in shades of gold and purple, and she could see small villages nestled in valleys that seemed completely isolated from the modern world. Rodriguez sat across from her, studying a tactical map, and occasionally shouting updates to the rest of the squad over the helicopter's engine noise. He had barely spoken to her during the pre-mission briefing, communicating only the essential information she needed to know. Her role was simple: maintain communications with headquarters, stay with the equipment, and avoid getting in the way. Walsh sat next to Rodriguez, cleaning his rifle for the third time that morning. He was always nervous before missions, but he covered it with aggressive humor and constant movement. Today he seemed more agitated than usual, probably because their target was known to command some of the best fighters in the region. Brown was calm and methodical as always, double-checking his equipment and reviewing the mission timeline. As the senior enlisted man in the squad, he was Rodriguez's right hand and backup leader. Maria had always respected his professionalism, even though his subtle dismissal of her capabilities hurt more than Rodriguez's open hostility. Gutierrez sat quietly with his medical supplies, running through procedures in his head. As the squad's medic, he carried extra responsibility for everyone's survival. Maria had noticed that he seemed to treat every mission like someone was definitely going to get hurt, which was probably a smart attitude given their line of work. Thompson was the most obviously nervous member of the squad. This was only his fourth mission outside the wire, and his first time going after a high-value target. He kept adjusting his helmet and body armor, trying to find a comfortable position that probably did not exist. Maria felt a bit of sympathy for him. She remembered her first few weeks at Chapman, when everything seemed dangerous and unfamiliar. The helicopter began to descend toward a small landing zone carved into the side of a mountain ridge. The pilot had to approach carefully, fighting wind currents that could slam the aircraft into the rocky slopes without warning. Maria felt her stomach drop as they touched down harder than expected, the landing gear scraping against loose stones. "Move, move, move," Rodriguez shouted as soon as the helicopter settled. The squad grabbed their equipment and jumped out quickly, forming a defensive perimeter while the pilot kept the engines running. Within 30 seconds, they were clear of the landing zone, and the helicopter was climbing back into the sky, leaving them alone in the mountains. The silence after the helicopter disappeared was almost overwhelming. Maria had grown used to the constant background noise of the base: generators, vehicles, helicopters, and hundreds of people going about their daily routines. Here, there was only the wind whistling through the rocks, and the sound of their own breathing. Rodriguez immediately took charge, consulting his GPS and pointing toward a ridge line about a kilometer away. "That is our objective," he said quietly. "We established the observation post on the far side of that ridge, overlooking the valley. Intelligence says our target will be moving through there sometime in the next 24 hours. The squad began moving in standard formation, with Rodriguez in the lead and Brown bringing up the rear. Maria was positioned in the middle of the formation with the radio equipment, which made sense tactically but also reinforced her role as support rather than a fighting member of the team. The terrain was more difficult than anything she had experienced during training. The mountain slope was covered with loose rock that shifted underfoot, making every step treacherous. There was no trail, just a general direction toward higher ground. The thin air made breathing difficult, and Maria found herself working harder than the others to maintain the pace. After an hour of climbing, they reached the base of the ridge and stopped for a brief rest. Rodriguez studied the terrain ahead through his binoculars while the others checked their equipment and hydrated. The final approach to their destination would be the most dangerous part of the movement, since they would be silhouetted against the sky as they crossed the ridge line. "Listen up," Rodriguez said quietly. "Once we cross that ridge, we are in Indian country. No talking unless absolutely necessary. Hand signals only. If something goes wrong, we rally back here and call for extraction." He looked directly at Maria. "Santos, your job is to establish communications with headquarters once we are in position. After that, you monitor the radio and stay out of the way. If we get into contact, you do not engage unless I specifically tell you to. Clear?" Maria nodded, swallowing her frustration. She understood the tactical reasoning behind his orders, but it still felt like being treated as a liability rather than an asset. She wanted to prove herself, but Rodriguez was making it clear that her first priority was staying alive and not interfering with the real soldiers. The climb to the ridge line took another 30 minutes of careful movement across increasingly treacherous terrain. Maria's legs burned from the altitude and exertion, but she kept pace with the rest of the squad. When they finally crested the ridge, the view was breathtaking and terrifying. The valley spread out below them like a three-dimensional map, with a dirt road winding through the bottom like a brown snake. The valley was perhaps 2 kilometers wide, surrounded by peaks that rose another 1,000 feet higher than their current position. Maria could see why intelligence believed their target would use this route. It was one of the few passable roads through this section of mountains, and it offered good concealment from aerial surveillance. Rodriguez led them down the reverse slope of the ridge to a cluster of large boulders that would provide both concealment and protection. The position offered an excellent view of the road below, while keeping them hidden from anyone traveling through the valley. It was exactly the kind of location Maria had studied in tactical manuals, but seeing it in person made her appreciate the complexity of real military operations. The squad spent the next hour establishing their observation post. Brown and Walsh positioned themselves to watch different approaches to the valley, while Gutierrez set up a small medical station in a protected area between the rocks. Thompson was assigned to watch their rear, making sure no one could sneak up on them from behind. Maria established communications with headquarters, confirming their position and reporting that they were ready to begin the surveillance mission. The radio worked perfectly despite the mountainous terrain, which was a relief since communications problems could turn a successful mission into a disaster. With their position established, the waiting began. Intelligence estimated that their target could appear anywhere from mid-afternoon to the following morning, which meant they might be in position for 24 hours or more. Maria settled in with her radio equipment and tried to make herself comfortable, knowing it was going to be a long day. The hours passed slowly. The squad maintained strict noise discipline, communicating only through hand signals and occasional whispered reports into their radios. Maria monitored the command frequency, listening to updates from other teams positioned throughout the region. The operation involved dozens of soldiers and several helicopter crews, all coordinated through the communications network she was maintaining. As the afternoon wore on, the temperature began to drop. At their altitude, even October could bring near-freezing conditions once the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Maria was grateful for the extra layers she had packed, but she could see that some of the others were less prepared for the cold. Thompson in particular seemed to be struggling. He was from Florida and had never experienced mountain conditions like these. His lips were turning blue despite the warm clothing, and his hands shook slightly as he tried to maintain his grip on his rifle. Gutierrez noticed the symptoms and quietly moved closer to Thompson, sharing his body heat and checking for signs of hypothermia. Around 4 in the afternoon, Rodriguez received a radio update that changed everything. Intelligence had intercepted communications indicating that their target was ahead of schedule and might appear in the valley within the next few hours. The news sent a ripple of tension through the squad as everyone checked their equipment and prepared for action. Maria felt her heart rate increase as the mission suddenly shifted from routine surveillance to imminent contact. This was what she had trained for, what she had been waiting for, but it was also more real and immediate than anything she had experienced. She checked her rifle for the 10th time that day and made sure her radio equipment was ready to transmit targeting information to the helicopter gunships that were standing by to support them. As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the valley floor, Rodriguez raised his hand for silence. Through his binoculars, he could see movement on the road below. A small convoy of vehicles was approaching from the south, moving slowly and carefully through the mountain pass. Maria watched through her own binoculars as 3 pickup trucks came into view, each carrying several armed men. The vehicles moved with the cautious speed of people who knew they were in dangerous territory. Even from their elevated position, she could see the occupants scanning the surrounding ridges for signs of threat. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio, reporting the sighting to headquarters and requesting confirmation that this was their target. The response came back quickly. Intelligence confirmed that the convoy matched the description of their high-value target security detail. The Taliban commander was likely in one of those vehicles. "This is it," Rodriguez whispered to his squad. "Santos, call in the birds. Tell them we have positive identification and request immediate close air support." Maria keyed her radio and began transmitting the targeting information to the helicopter crews circling several kilometers away. Her voice was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. This was exactly the kind of high-stakes communications work she had trained for, and She felt proud that Rodriguez trusted her to handle such a critical task. The helicopters acknowledged her transmission and began moving toward the valley, but they were still several minutes away. The convoy below continued moving through the kill zone, unaware that they were being watched by hidden soldiers and that attack helicopters were closing in on their position. That was when everything went wrong. The first indication of trouble came from Thompson, who was watching their rear approach. He tapped Brown on the shoulder and pointed toward the ridge they had crossed earlier. Through binoculars, they could see movement among the rocks, at least a dozen armed men moving carefully toward their position. Rodriguez cursed under his breath as he realized what was happening. Their observation post had been discovered, probably by local Taliban fighters who knew the terrain better than any American intelligence report could capture. The enemy was moving to surround them while their target convoy continued through the valley below. "We have been compromised," Rodriguez reported over the radio. "Enemy fighters moving on our position from the north. Request immediate extraction." The response from headquarters was not encouraging. The nearest extraction helicopters were committed to other missions and would not be available for at least an hour. The attack helicopters could provide close air support, but they could not land to evacuate the squad from their current position. Rodriguez made a quick decision that would determine whether they lived or died. "We are moving to alternate position," he announced. "Brown, you and Walsh provide covering fire while we displace. Gutierrez, help Thompson. He looks like he is going into shock. Santos, pack up the radio gear and stay close to me." The squad began moving immediately, but they had waited too long. The Taliban fighters who had been approaching from the north opened fire just as the Americans started to leave their position. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them, sending chips of stone flying through the air like shrapnel. Maria felt a piece of rock hit her cheek as she struggled to pack up the radio equipment while staying low. The sound of gunfire echoed off the mountainsides, making it difficult to determine exactly where the shots were coming from. Rodriguez was shouting orders, but the noise made it hard to understand everything he was saying. Brown and Walsh returned fire from behind the largest boulder, their rifles adding to the chaos of sound that filled the valley. Maria could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions on the opposite ridge, indicating that they were facing a larger enemy force than anyone had expected. "Santos, leave the extra equipment," Rodriguez yelled. "Just grab the radio and move." Maria abandoned everything except the essential communications gear and followed Rodriguez as he led the squad toward what he hoped would be a more defensible position. The new location was about 200 meters away, behind a rocky outcrop that would provide better protection and a clearer view of the approaching enemy. They moved quickly but carefully, using the terrain to shield themselves from enemy fire. Thompson was struggling to keep up, and Gutierrez had to help support him as they crossed the exposed ground. Maria stayed close to Rodriguez, her radio crackling with updates from headquarters and the incoming helicopter crews. The new position was better defensively, but it also meant they were trapped on the ridge with enemy forces between them and any possible escape route. As they settled into their new location, Maria realized that they were in serious trouble. The Taliban fighters clearly knew the terrain better than the Americans did, and they seemed to be moving to cut off any avenue of retreat. Rodriguez established a defensive perimeter and tried to assess their situation. They had enough ammunition for a sustained firefight, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. Their only advantage was the incoming close air support, but the helicopters would need precise targeting information to avoid hitting the American position by mistake. "Santos," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with stress, "I need you to guide those helicopters onto the target. Can you do that?" Maria nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. For the first time since joining the squad, Rodriguez was depending on her for something that really mattered. She would not let him down. As she began coordinating with the helicopter pilots, enemy fire intensified around their position. The Taliban fighters were closing in, and the squad's situation was becoming desperate. But Maria focused on her radio, calmly providing the precise information the pilots needed to engage the enemy positions without endangering the Americans. This was her moment. This was what she had trained for, and she was not going to fail. The Taliban fighters moved like ghosts across the mountainside, using every piece of cover to advance on the American position. Maria could see them through her binoculars, dark figures darting between rocks, appearing for a moment before vanishing again into the landscape they knew better than their own homes. Each movement brought them closer to the ridge where Rodriguez's squad was trapped. "Contact left, 200 meters," Walsh shouted, opening fire on a group of fighters who had exposed themselves while crossing a small clearing. His rifle cracked repeatedly, the sound echoing off the mountainsides and mixing with the answering fire from enemy positions. Maria pressed herself against the rocky wall of their defensive position and tried to focus on her radio communications. The helicopters were still 5 minutes out, which might as well have been 5 hours given how quickly the tactical situation was deteriorating. She could hear the tension in the pilot's voice as he requested more precise targeting information. "Falcon 17, this is ground control," she transmitted, keeping her voice steady despite the bullets snapping overhead. "Enemy positions confirmed on ridge line bearing 270 degrees from our location, approximately 200 to 300 meters distance. Multiple fighting positions, estimate 12 to 15 fighters. Copy ground control. Falcon 17 has visual on your position. We are going to need you to mark the enemy locations with smoke or laser designation." Maria looked around their position and realized they had a problem. In their hasty movement from the original observation post, no one had grabbed the smoke grenades or laser designator equipment. They would have to guide the helicopters onto target using only verbal descriptions, which was much more dangerous and less accurate. "Rodriguez," she called out, "the pilots need us to mark enemy positions. Do we have any smoke?" Rodriguez was busy returning fire at a Taliban position that had appeared on their right flank. "Negative. We left everything at the original position. You will have to talk them onto target." This was exactly the kind of challenging situation Maria had trained for, but training had not prepared her for the stress of doing it while people were actively trying to kill her. She took a deep breath and keyed her radio again. "Falcon 17, we do not have marking capability. I will guide you verbally. Do you see the large boulder formation at the base of the ridge line, approximately 400 meters south of our position?" "Affirm. I have visual on the boulder formation. Enemy position is 100 meters north of that formation, behind a cluster of smaller rocks. They have been firing from multiple positions in that area." Brown suddenly cried out from his position on the left side of their perimeter. "I am hit. Gutierrez, I need you over here." Maria glanced over and saw blood spreading across Brown's shoulder where a bullet had found a gap in his body armor. Gutierrez immediately moved to treat the wound, exposing himself to enemy fire as he crossed the open space between positions. The loss of Brown's rifle reduced their defensive fire by 25%, which the Taliban fighters immediately exploited. They began moving more